Hello, Kosheek. Thank you for joining us today. Can you introduce yourself and your organisation?
Thanks, Sally. Um, I'm Kosheek Swechurran from the Graduate School of Business at the University of Capetown. I'm the director of their Executive MBA program and an associate professor in the faculty. And it's a pleasure to participate in your MOOC.
Thank you, Kosheek. Can you give us a little bit about your own background and how you came to be doing what you're doing currently at UCT?
I started out a career in manufacturing, designing plant control systems and plant optimization systems, and very technical field, and mostly trying to use technology to improve manufacturing processes. And it wasn't long, and I spent in total about 12 years doing this. And throughout this period, I kept going back to systems and what are the systemic problems we were solving. And as I moved through my career, I became more and more intrigued with the idea of designing purposeful systems, because I got the sense that if the systems were designed and gave the participants a purpose, then managing is less challenging, and you get higher levels of innovation, creativity, cooperation, and energy. So it just seemed logical that I wanted to understand and study how to design purposeful systems. And then I came to the University of Capetown in 2006, and I started study towards a PhD in project organizing, or the philosophy of project organizing. And I read a lot of existential philosophy and sociology to try and understand the lived experience of being in projects. And then developed my systems thinking ideas further, and read many of the systems theorists, Umberto Maturana, Francisco Varela, Peter Checkland, Jeffrey Vickers, and a whole number of other systems authors. And soon realized that the whole discipline of systems thinking is a loosely interacting set of fields of studies that are mutually complementing the findings of, and it was truly an interdisciplinary space. And in around 2012, I met Professor Walter Bates, who was then the dean of the Graduate School of Business at the University of Capetown, and we started chatting about the ideas he had about complexity and the ideas I had about existentialism and systems thinking. And he then asked me to come and help take their executive program to newer heights, which was already a successful program. And this has been my journey since for the last what would be 20, 22, 24 years.
Kosheek, that's really interesting. So how do you build that systems perspective that you were just talking about into the learning experience of the Executive MBA students?
That's an interesting question, Sally. I think it's a focus on both the tools, which are the systems, the field of systems thinking has offered many tools, concepts, and theories to look at building models that show emergence, concurrent hypotheses, all running at the same time. And you have to teach that to the students while at the same time you build what I would say an ontology of their own being in the world and how action is created. Now, Katja Laszlo, interestingly, wrote in a paper in 2012 that systems thinking is the start of a journey of improving one's consciousness about the system one is participating in. And in the paper itself, she doesn't really give ideas on how to do this. And I've been, over the years, tinkering and trying out different things. But what I found is necessary to do is to start teaching the tools with a ontology where the system is out there almost. You get students to appreciate model systems out there, and then you start to shift that ontology to talk about, well, systems from the perspective of somebody, from a perceptually guided actor in the world. And then you shift that and you talk about, systems in the world that are intellectual delineations and worlds that people are functioning in. And, then you start to see language quite differently. And at the same time, you also start to talk about, the whole theoretical construct of what a system is. It's really an intellectual delineation of a world that you would like to discuss with other people or reconcile perspectives around a particular way in which you think the world should work or is working. And then finally, when you reach the what I would call the most mature stage of executive development, it's the building of these models for the sake of insight and emotional commitment. So at this level now, you truly use the models to be affected by the modeling, as well as affect the world out there. So the modeling is done for entirely different reasons. So the teaching of systems thinking has two strands. The one's the tools and the concepts, and the other strand is a whole philosophical understanding of how action arises in the world and talking about the being of human beings in the world. And I think through those kinds of conversations, you truly build a competence of systems thinking and systems being. Because the one without the others is not the most effective state to have in an executive in particular.
And just taking that on a little bit, so the objective really, if you think in teleological terms of means and ends, is actually to bring about some form of change and transformation. So is that being in the world the mechanism through which you think collectively you can bring about change in that system, change in the way that things are happening towards some kind of normative, challenge-based scenario, some kind of alteration of the world that people experience?
Absolutely. I mean, you could also use the word, you make people more conscious of their own agency in the world. So you're really looking at systems and the levers with which you can change these systems. So, when I talk about an emotional commitment or affectedness from the modeling, that's exactly what I mean, is the consciousness and agency to change it so in a way, through systems ideas, you truly build a transformative leadership capability.
That's really interesting. That's so relevant to our MOOC as well, in the way that we would integrate those different ideas into a kind of holistic way of thinking. So now I'd like you to explain a bit to us about how you might apply that thinking in the specific context of challenges facing South Africa today.
We could start off with just recovering some key issues in South Africa's current political, economical, and social context. So we have in a couple of major priorities to attend to in South Africa. The one being the kind of high unemployment rate amongst the youth of our country. At the same time, we face a challenge with trying to pursue economic development in a world context where low growth is kind of the new normal. And thirdly, you look at the world of commodity prices now, and almost being at the bottom end of the cycle of a commodity boom that has passed us, and now trying to think about how do you shift the large workforces and industry focus on mining for extractive mining. And the fourth challenge is, if you look at it, is dealing with the low levels of social development that is arising from low levels of human development that is arising from a combination of factors: economic development, historical inequalities. So in a way, we have a complex situation where we are noticing growing levels of inequality, growing levels of distress, also social systems in distress. And these have had an organizing trajectory that has been started decades ago. But our inability to try and model and understand these things, and understand that the collective efforts of government, business, and other agencies responsible for improving the situation, and understanding how they all interrelate, has not been a focus. What we've rather been doing is pursuing policy choices that were conceived in isolation and then integrated as an afterthought. So if you were working with a systems metaphor, you would have understood that all of these things are interrelated. They're a set of interlocking ideas that are accumulating gains or accumulating losses for society, and how do we manage this big moving picture? But we make plans periodically, almost in a vacuum, and not understanding that actually we're a product of a system that's already set in motion. So it's no use arguing with the economists that that's what they're doing. I think it's trying to change the way in which you have public policy making that's not done in a systemic manner, nor is it done in a manner that fosters action. If you go back to the systems idea of world making, and the world making needing a dialogue for the world to concretely be accessible for people to participate in. Our policy making processes have tried, but not necessarily achieved it. So we have policy that's made and in the minds and the hearts of the policymakers, but not necessarily in the minds and the hearts of every member of society. So we don't have a concerted effort to move together forward in any particular way. So it points to a real lack of systems thinking, a largest planning activities as a nation. And that's a real challenge, and I think it's a challenge that is partly educational, but it's also partly the philosophical ideas that underpin how we plan governments, how do we plan public policy. So, what we're arguing and should argue for is a different ontology to look at these problems with. And I can't claim that we're very far down the road with that, but we've been putting in effort, and I think we ought to put in more effort there.
That's really fascinating. And then I think finally, because on the MOOC we're asking the participants to think about some of the messages and tools and things that we present and our practitioners present during the course of the 6 weeks, and think of it in the context of a real lived example that is affecting them at the moment, or maybe in their organisation or in their community or in their professional group, and to apply some of the things that we've been talking about. So can you take an example in the South Africa context where your systems thinking could usefully be applied to address a problem that might currently exist, or maybe one of your students has worked on, or something that's a real lived example of what you're explaining?
I probably won't use mining. I'll use an example of a logistics company in South Africa.
Uh-huh.
So, there was a student who's worked for a multinational logistics company in South Africa, and the company he worked for is listed in I think it's the New York Stock Exchange. So it's a multinational from that perspective, and they had no real contextual understanding of the low, how to deal with the frustrations of South Africa being in a low growth environment, and poor business results at the same time. And he had to find a way in which he could himself become motivated to do something about this. You could almost say it would have resulted in abdicating the leadership role of taking this poor situation forward and making it better. And you face the macro context of the shareholder pressure of wanting better returns and consistent returns, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, that pressure has to be there. And then you had another subsystem of there being poor business results for a number of reasons, and he was demotivated by this, and he was the world he was seeing was one of hopelessness, and but as soon as he started to model and resist try and find new business model choices, not necessarily accept the current choices on the table, cut costs to deliver more returns to shareholders, or resign and find something more prosperous. He really tried to find a new business model, and the systems tools had helped him to develop a perspective of the world in which an investment in the long term could also sit concurrently with the short-term demands placed on the organizational entity. And if it wasn't through the systems thinking tools, then he would have just felt hopeless, I think. There wouldn't have been no levers for him to draw on. So that's an example of how systems thinking tools help re-world somebody who's become de-worlded in a sense, where they don't see levers in the system in which they can change and shift it.
Well, thank you, Kosheek. That's a lovely example of how, in the South Africa context and the particular economic, social context, a real project was developed for one of your students to re-look at the company they worked in from a systems perspective, to bring about change, a new way of thinking towards a new form of responsibility to the South African society. So I'd like to thank you for joining us very, very much indeed, and we'll be in touch again. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. It was a pleasure.